Good morning and welcome to the St Wilfrid's General Election Parliamentary Candidates Debate for 2015. Yesterday you watched your sixth form candidates debate your questions live on stage. Today you have the chance to challenge the parliamentary candidates for the Crawley constituency itself. The polling stations opened for voting at 7 a.m. this morning, and the latest opinion polls are still having the main parties neck and neck, and the smaller parties are in prime position to join a coalition government again and to influence how our nation is governed. The Crawley constituency is finely balanced, and in our sixth form we have well over 100 students eligible to vote, and your votes could tip the balance in this local race. Today we'll be one of the only schools in the UK, possibly the only school in the UK, where our parliamentary candidates will be questioned by students on the day of the election itself. We're honoured to have them. They are Henry Smith of the Conservative Party, Chris Oxlade of the Labour Party and Guy Hudson of the Green Party. Please welcome them. So just going to start to give you a minute each to explain why about your party's main policies. Mr Oxlade.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation today. Obviously, it is a frantic day for us, but back in 2010, we came in for the Hustings event and the Question Time event then, and it's been, hopefully today will be just as good. There's some cracking questions when I've come to St Wilfrid's before. One of the best ones, I think, was when I said, if the Prime Minister's standing on the stage, what question would you ask him? To one student put their hand up and said, why do you still employ Michael Gove? Which was probably the best question I've ever heard of any school. So my name is Chris Oxlade. I'm Labour's parliamentary candidate for Crawley. I'm delighted to be standing for Labour in Crawley. I'm born and bred. I went to school, don't hold against me, at Hazelwick. But I know, my partner went to Wilfrid, so it's okay. Basically for the last sort of 7 or 8 years, I've been involved in politics, fighting really hard to change things and make things better in Crawley. And actually, young people are at the heart of Labour's manifesto. We want to cut tuition fees. We're the only party that's going to be in power that's going to cut tuition fees down to £6,000. The other parties, the Tories and the Lib Dems, haven't ruled out any kind of rise up to £11,500 for your tuition fees. Also, for me, the big thing about young people in Crawley is having opportunities. Now, there's been severe cuts to funding here at St Wilfrid's and at Thomas Bennett, and a lot of the secondary schools at further education for sixth form and for A-levels. And that's, you know, you're talking about millions of pounds being cut from your budget, which means less staff, less students, and less opportunities for you. So one of the things I'll be taking up the mantle if I'm lucky enough to win is making sure that further education funding gets rectified. West Sussex has one of the worst deals in the country for its funding formula, and that's one thing I'll be fighting really hard for. Are you winding me up? Because it was like that.
I was third, but thank you.
I'm sure I do not. I'll come to you third. I don't want to rock the boat. Mr Smith.
Well, good morning to St Wilfrid's. It's fantastic to be back here. As Chris said earlier on, you set a precedent 5 years ago by having an election hustings meeting on polling day itself, and it probably is unique anywhere in the country, so you're to be congratulated for that. And the amazing production team. I really feel nervous now because it really feels like I'm on BBC Question Time. My name is Henry Smith. I am the Conservative Party candidate for Crawley, and over the last 5 years I've been the Member of Parliament for Crawley. I moved to this town 21 years ago when my wife got a job at Crawley Hospital and I started business in Manor Royal. And then in 1997 I became a county councillor. Latterly I was leader of West Sussex County Council, which is a role I held until 2010 when I was privileged to be elected to Parliament by the people of Crawley. This is going to be a very important election. 5 years ago, we were facing one of the worst recessions this country has ever seen, financial crisis, and there have been some very difficult decisions that have had to be made to ensure that we have gone from a country with the largest debt out of any in the EU, including places like Greece and Spain, to the strongest growing economy anywhere in the industrialized world. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because of deliberate policies, and only with a recovering economy can we afford to invest in public services like education, like the NHS. NHS funding has been increased for each and every year, including here in Crawley over the last 5, and the pledge is to increase that funding going forward and to protect the school's budget. With regard to higher and further education, I was very pleased several years ago to open the new University Centre at Central Sussex College, because one of the things I want to see is local young people in Crawley making the most of the first-class employment opportunities that we have in this town, and being able to link that. So apprenticeships have doubled in the last 5 years. I was pleased 5 years ago to introduce STEM Fest to Crawley schools, and we've seen a real take-up of STEM subjects, really encouraged amongst young women as well taking up those subjects. And I want to see Crawley young people taking the employment opportunities that we have here in Crawley. We have the highest employment levels ever in this town, but too many people are commuting into this town to take those jobs rather than people here. And so what I want to focus on in the coming 5 years, if I'm given the privilege of being re-elected, is ensuring that you get the best out of this fantastic town that it is. Thank you.
And then, Mr. Hudson.
Thank you very much. Well, it's lovely to be here at such a fantastic event. I'm incredibly impressed. I'm very new to politics. I was only selected 5 weeks ago, and I only joined the Green Party, which is the first party I've ever joined 2 years ago. And I did so because I was appalled and incredibly worried about the levels of inequality in this country and the way the direction of the country is going. So I believe that fair is worth fighting for. And my background has been in industry. And so apprenticeship, a proper long-term apprenticeship with Land Rover, learning how to design and build cars, and then into the telecoms industry. And I'm a problem solver. So I helped set up a charity 10 years ago. And between my two friends and I, we've delivered water, hygiene and sanitation to 170,000 people in Western Province in Zambia. And so basically, what I offer are my skills of problem solving. The problems that I've seen in Crawley with lack of education funding, the lack of funding the local council, transportation problems, you name it, it's got it. But none of these problems are simply solved. We cannot solve them by saying, oh, we're going to spend another 8 billion or whatever it is on NHS. On what and how? When already the privatisation of National Health Services is costing $4.5 billion a year. So we need to invest wisely. So what the Greens policies are to increase the tax base. The country at the moment is run for the 1% and not the 99%. So we want to tax the people who can afford to be taxed, both in terms of their wealth and also land utilisation, and so that generates a lot of extra money that can be very carefully and wisely spent, for instance, on bringing schools back into local authority control so that the whole area can have its educational provision planned properly, but also so that the college is properly funded, so that students are not sent home when there aren't enough lecturers to take courses and all that kind of thing. So we want to fix those kind of problems and to rebuild society. And that's what I represent, and that's why I'm here.
Very much indeed, all of you. So we have our first question from the audience. It's from our sixth former, Neve Quinlivan.
You have nearly 100 18-year-olds in the hall who will have a chance to vote for the first time tomorrow. Why should they vote for your party?
So again, I mean, summing up a little bit what you've already said here, but particularly pertaining to our students, why should they vote for you? Chris.
Thank you very much. Like I outlined earlier, I mean, it's really about your future. If you choose to go to university, Labour's going to slash tuition fees down to at least £6,000, if not less. But also if you're into vocational skills, there's a huge problem at the moment with a lot of the schools, like St Wilfrid's, Hazelwick, Thomas Bennett, that are very much sort of independent of basically the colleges, because of the way the government's sort of driven the schools locally, is that it's all about targets and hitting targets and cutting budgets and all this kind of stuff. And there's a discrepancy between if you want vocational skills. Now, all the schools want as many people to go to university, but also there's a lot of people that don't want to go to university, they want vocational skills. So there needs to be much more of a balance between like Central Sussex College and the schools locally, in my opinion. But the other thing is, I mean, you look at if you're going out to work, for instance, if you're going to leave St Wilfrid's and go straight out to work, you want the best possible job. If you want to go into an apprenticeship, you know, the rate for an apprenticeship is £2.65 an hour. That should be driven up. One thing I'm going to do if I win, is make sure that I visit all the companies that we can in Crawley, not just driving up from the living wage and getting as many companies signed up to the living wage, but driving the apprenticeships, because there's a lot of apprenticeships, there's friends of mine, people your age, that are in apprenticeships that basically kind of a slave labour, and there's no guarantee you're getting a job in it. We've got some excellent companies in Crawley that actually drive, and have done for 15, 20 years, drive apprenticeships, you know, from being a plumber or a bricklayer, and you actually get a job at the end of that, rather than actually just doing a course, maybe not even getting a qualification as an apprenticeship. So although there's record numbers of apprenticeships signing up, they've got to be quality apprenticeships. I started an apprenticeship when I was at Radio Mercury. Anyone remember Mercury? Yeah, you didn't listen either, did you? No. Capital Q's. But the big problem when I did my apprenticeship, and I did it over a year, the skills I learnt then are the skills I'm using now. So I want that opportunity for everyone in Crawley.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Henry Smith.
Well, one of the reasons why I'm a member of the Conservative Party is because we believe in aspiration and opportunity for everybody. And particularly it's ensuring that young people have the tools and are equipped to make the most of that. Crawley, as I was saying a few moments ago, is an amazing town. As I say, we've got record high employment levels. We've got companies not just from the aviation sector, the obvious ones like Virgin Atlantic, headquartered here, Chewy Travel, the world's biggest package holiday company, but we've also got some first-class industrial companies like Electa Oncology Systems, global leader in making oncology equipment, Varian Medical Systems, Novo Nordisk, world's biggest insulin manufacturer, geology companies like CCG Veritas, avionics companies and defence companies like Thales UK, all based within a few miles of here. What I was saying earlier on, and I think is very important, is ensuring that young people have the opportunity to, whether it's through the doubling of apprenticeships, which we want to double again in the next 5 years, or whether it's going on to further or higher education, to actually link to those first-class global companies that are located here. But also I think one of the issues for young people is ensuring that when they get into employment that they're going to have a decent income. And part of that is ensuring that the minimum wage is raised, and it has just recently been raised and will be raised further over the next 5 years. But part of that is also ensuring that when you are working, you're paying less taxation, because the state is very well-meaning, but it's not very efficient at spending money. Therefore, you know, we believe in lower taxation because you and your families are best equipped to know how best to spend your hard-earned money on yourselves. And also, I just thirdly say, I think housing's a big issue, particularly here in the southeast of England. Obviously, a part of the country that's economically very successful, but it means there's a gravitational pull of people coming here. So very much support the 2,100 houses currently being built in Crawley, and ensuring that people from Crawley can continue to live in Crawley should they so wish. So it's about aspiration and the opportunity to make the most of that. And again, I'd just say you can only fund those public services and that infrastructure if you have a growing economy, and you can only do that if we deal with our debts, so that your generation and even your kids' generation aren't paying them off for the mistakes of my generation and the generation before.
Okay. Interesting to note that you don't blame the Labour Party particularly there for the past mistakes of the economy.
I mean, if I may just come back very briefly.
Very briefly, please.
Very briefly. There was a global recession, but I think it was particularly worse in this country because of the lack of regulation of our financial sector, and because the government at the time massively overspent more than what was coming in. So that's why the deficit in this country was far worse than any other EU country. That's
quite refreshing to hear you say that, Henry. Guy.
Well, we've just heard what's been going on between the two parties. We've had the same kind of politics being going on for a long time. Welcome to the world of voting. And what I would say, if you really want your vote to count, then vote for something different. We want, for instance, proportional representation, so that when whatever party you vote for, the vote is allocated towards the party, and the number of MPs in Parliament will be reflected by your vote. If you do vote for the Greens, then because it's different and because it's noticed, it will help the cause towards a fairer politics. Also, we have had austerity now for a long time. We had austerity in the 1930s. And what happened then was, because everybody was cutting back, a lot of people lost their jobs. We've got a lot of employment here, but people are underemployed. A lot of them are not full-time employment, and also the money in your pocket is very much less than it should be as employed. So that what we have now is a huge number of people on benefits who are working because they can't afford to pay their rent or to feed themselves. So we have 20 centres in Crawley now that are giving out free food. And this, in the 7th richest country in the world, is a complete and utter scandal. So what we need to do is I said it before, but the people who can afford to pay tax need to pay more tax, and that needs to fund better lives and more investment in green jobs for the future. Now, Crawley is very, very special. We're in the longest recovery, so there's always dips and ups and downs. Anyone who studies economics knows about economic cycles. But as you're coming out of recession, it's called a recovery. We're in the longest recovery for 200 years. And that is because of the mistaken policy of austerity. We should be spending more. Now, we know we can spend more. The government has encouraged the Bank of England to release huge amounts of extra cash, but it's been released to the financial markets, not to industry. And it's green policy to release some cash, but spend it on industry. David Cameron gave a speech when he came in to say that we needed to rebalance the economy so that there was a far bigger mix of industry. And actually, it's got a lot worse. So we need intelligent, literate economic policy, no sticking plasters, and we need to have people who really understand what's going on. So that is what our green policies are. They're not simple, but we are addressing these problems properly.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. We're going to go to what would have been our third question now, because I think our second question has largely been answered here. So if I can make sure our microphones come along just down to here. We have William Hibberson from year 7. William Hibberson, could you stand up, please? Where are you? William. Okay, get a microphone down here to Will. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ferry. Will, what's the question?
What's more important, the economy or the environment?
So, the economy or the environment? Chris Oxlade.
It's a very good question. For me, it's always a balance. The economy, as Henry said, the economy in Crawley, we've always had a strong economy in Crawley because of Gatwick Airport. And it's kind of the classic example of economy versus environment when you look at Gatwick. There's a proposed second runway, which may or may not be awarded to either Gatwick or Heathrow later this year. And there's been a huge debate on whether or not people want the second runway at Gatwick. We've all got slightly differing opinions on the stage, and we've had this debate, I think, 15 times over the last few weeks. But for me, it's a balance. It's making sure, taking Gatwick, for example, personally, I'd like to see a second runway for the 50 years' time for Crawley's economy, because we don't know what Crawley's economy is going to be in 50 years' time. If we can protect that with some kind of investment at Gatwick. But that's not at any cost. So it's not saying, with the environmental factors that come with a second runway and all the aircraft, then we need to get those protection, those measures in first, and for infrastructure. So it's an interesting question, that one, but there's no easy answer. I'll leave it to the scientist.
Okay, Mr. Smith.
I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. I think that you can have a growing economy, and I think you can have a sustainable environmental output as well. And I'll just give you a few examples of that. One local example, so Virgin Atlantic Airways, headquartered here in Crawley, as I was mentioning earlier on. You'd think, an aviation company that produces pollution. But what they are investing in is biofuels, and they've done a number of test flights with biofuels a few years ago now, and they're beginning to introduce them into the fleet. We've got more efficient aircraft now, whose carbon footprint is much reduced. So that's just one example of how through innovation and technology we can still grow our economy and provide the services we all need and want, but not ruin the environment into the process as well. Secondly, another example, the world's largest offshore wind farm is about 50 miles from here in the Thames Estuary. That was opened a couple of years ago. And again, that is now coming on stream, providing green and clean energy to our national grid. And it's an industry that we are one of the world leaders on as well, and we need to develop that. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think you can have economic innovation which is environmentally sustainable as well. And I think this country has an important role to play globally in terms of, we're a very small country in terms of our carbon output compared to places like the United States or China. But I think people look to this country as a responsible member of the global community, and I think we can lead by example. Just finally, I would say, and this is just a personal pitch, it's not Conservative Party policy, as you'll guess in about 5 seconds' time, but I'm vegetarian, and one of the reasons I'm vegetarian is because if the whole global population was vegetarian, we would cut our carbon emissions by about 80%. Because of the process of rearing meat is very carbon intensive. So that's just a personal aside. But like I said, I think we can have a successful economy and not necessarily have to damage our environment at the same time.
Okay, thank you. I'm not going to ask you whether you're vegetarian, Guy, but what are your thoughts on this?
My daughter's actually vegan, but...
I've seen him eat a bacon sandwich, so I know he's not vegetarian.
I don't eat bread, actually, but anyway, because I'm gluten sensitive. But anyway, that's beside the point.
So let's put the bacon sandwich aside. Economy or environment?
Well, I think this is the ultimate trick question. Well done. Because the economy in the future is all about the environment. If we want to do things, people talk about sustainability and sustainable and all that kind of stuff. It's almost become meaningless because it's used for almost everything. It's for greenwash. But really, it just means lasting. So if you're going to get a green job, it means it can last. It means that you haven't used up that bit of the environment, so it doesn't work anymore. If you're a farmer and you don't look after your soil, well, you're not going to be able to farm that for very much longer. So you want to do things that are lasting. Now, my example, I know the car industry very well, and if you buy a modern car compared to, say, one 10 years ago, you'll find it uses a lot less petrol or diesel. And the reason is because of a huge, huge amount of research and technology that's all gone into that. Lots of well-paid jobs all across the world helping, perfecting catalysts and fuel injection systems and whatever else, so that when you drive your car, it's using half the amount of petrol. Now, if we take our housing, we now permit real old gas-guzzling housing. We compared to the continent, and we can now build houses that only cost £50 a year to heat instead of £1,000 a year to heat. Now, wouldn't that be better? Wouldn't that benefit every family in the land if we had efficient houses? Now, we can do that. We have the technology to do that. But in order to build that, it means that every plumber, every electrician, every architect, every surveyor needs to be trained in these new technologies. So we need to invest in people, we need to invest in housing, and what we will result in, so we need to spend money to do that. And we need to do this investment, and that means that all our housing will be that much more efficient, nicer to live in, and much cheaper. And that's just one example. You could do transportation, you could do, all right. So every sector of the economy needs to be like that. And all the jobs that we see in the housing, the Crawley industrial estates, when they convert to the green economy, it means it's lasting and they're better paid. So my point is the future economy is all about protecting the environment.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Okay, so our next question, a Year 11 student That Year 11 student is Davina. Where are you, Davina? Please stand up. Thank you very much indeed.
Can the UK afford Trident, or can we afford not to have it?
So, just again, the Trident is the name given to the UK nuclear defence capability. Very, very expensive, potentially very, very dangerous, but of course, it gives us a huge status on the world stage. Chris Oxlade, can we afford Trident or afford not to have it?
Labour Party is supporting the renewal of Trident when it comes up later this year. My personal opinions, the more I looked into the Trident issue a few years ago, the more complicated the actual issues are. And I have to say, I've learnt a lot from this man on the left of me, because I'm trying not to steal his thunder, but the big issue for me is actually the nuclear waste. If you get rid of Trident and the submarines, is what you do with the nuclear waste. It'd been great all those years ago, 40 years ago, not to actually have those nuclear weapons in the first place. We have them, and there's a huge amount of jobs associated with that as well, particularly in the north of England. So for me, it's kind of there's a moral dilemma, but the actual practical issues of losing, tens of thousands of jobs, and also it's actually disposing of the nuclear waste. There is no safe way to do it. It's incredibly costly to do it. So the savings that we can make, and there's lots of figures bandied about renewal of Trident or renewing or not renewing Trident of £100 billion, but that's over the next 40 years. So you often hear the thing, we can save £100 billion and we can invest that straight away in schools, and that's the cost over the next few decades. So when you actually look at the costs and the savings, you have to ask yourself whether or not there is a financial need for that anyway.
Well, 100 billion divided by 4 is, of course, 25 billion. So still a pretty big amount.
Well, for 10 years, yeah.
Oh, 10 years, okay. Yeah. So still a huge amount.
You're testing me now, aren't you?
I am.
Is that Hayeswork education?
Henry Smith.
Well, it's also Conservative Party policy to renew the UK's independent nuclear deterrent. We live in a very uncertain world. I'm 45 years old. When I was growing up, when I was your age, it was still I feel very old now, it was still the height of the Cold War. And the threat then to our freedom and our security was from the dictatorship in the Soviet Union and that sphere of influence. Obviously, that massively changed in the late 1980s, and now the threats that we face are very different. It would be a very brave person indeed to say that when you're my age, what threats will we be facing now? I don't think many people would have guessed the way that the security situation in the globe will have changed over the last 30, 40 years, and who knows how the threats to this country and the Western democracies will change over the coming 30 or 40 years. So I think it would be folly, really, of us to give up something that has kept peace amongst the major nations in the world ever since the end of the Second World War. Also, I think it's important, as Chris says, we can't uninvent nuclear weapons, sadly. They are a reality, and there's a choice. Do responsible Western democracies have them, or do they unilaterally give them up and have countries that are less democratic or not democratic at all possessing nuclear weapons? That would be a distinct threat to our future freedoms. Also, a mention was made from the floor that there's a point about this country's influence in the world as well. There are 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. All of them are nuclear powers. If we were to lose our independent nuclear deterrent, very quickly we would no longer be a permanent member of the UN Security Council. And I think it's important that a country, and I say this unashamedly, a country like this country, we've made many mistakes in our history, but by and large we are a force for good, a proud democratic tradition. Tomorrow we celebrate VE Day, the 70th anniversary of our defeating totalitarianism in Nazi Germany. This country has a lot to be proud of, and we have a positive role to play on the world stage. An American president once said, "Speak softly but carry a big stick," and I think that's probably what a great democracy like ours should do.
Okay, thank you. So, Guy Hudson, nuclear weapons help us punch above our weight, and they're a force for good. Thoughts?
Well, we're still trying to find a use for it. Trying to find a scenario where it could ever be used. And if we go back to the Cold War, the secret documents are coming out now, which shows that twice they were nearly fired. The nuclear rockets were nearly fired by Russia because they thought mistakenly that America were about to fire theirs. It's kind of, that would have been pretty bad. And if we've also got nuclear powers and we're allies with the Americans, where would they want to hit first? We're actually nearer them. So we're actually drawing fire by having them. So they are, from a defense point of view, they are silly. There's no use for them at all. Now, from an ordinary everyday running point of view, remember, there's a huge area in northern Japan now, which is a no-go area forever. And nuclear waste is pouring out from the Fukushima plant, and they've detected nuclear radiation right across the other side of the Pacific in California. So Fukushima is still polluting. And it's polluting because of us. We built a reprocessing plant in Sellafield, and we tried to get it working for 30 years. And it's why Germany have stopped nuclear power. It's because the Fukushima thing particularly failed badly because the third reactor there was storing nuclear waste that should have gone to Sellafield but couldn't because that didn't work. And then if you look at the reprocessing plant, why they closed it down, is because they lost 70 tons of nuclear waste. It leaked into a pond underneath, and they didn't discover it for 3 years. Now, all it takes to wipe out London is a briefcase full of this stuff, put it up in a balloon, and blast it over London, and that's the end of London forever. This stuff is fantastically dangerous. It's unbelievably dangerous, and we don't know what to do with it. As the ex-Chancellor of Germany said when they were discussing whether to get rid of nuclear power, he said, right, for every household, we've got about a dustbin full of spent nuclear waste. So everybody who's voting for nuclear waste, please, will you take delivery of your dustbin full? Because obviously you know what to do with it. Now, not only are the weapons difficult to find a use for and fantastically expensive, and if you really want to build if you want to carry it, talk softly and walk with a big stick, you invest in conventional forces, far more flexible, and we've underinvested in our conventional forces enormously for years. We know how our soldiers have suffered in the field, and also how they suffer when they come back in society. We don't look after them properly. What we need, so these nuclear subs haven't only got nuclear weapons, but the engine that powers the nuclear sub is a nuclear reactor itself. And they're what is maintained at Faslane, which the Scots are up in arms about, because every year they have an increasing number of fires there. Last year they had 70 fires. And given how dangerous this stuff is, if it's anything nuclear, anything waste that gets involved in that fire, it's straight in the atmosphere. And there's Glasgow nearby. You know, there's a big population density there. So you can see why the Scots don't want to maintain those things there. So it's not working. It just isn't working. It's not safe. And even if we decide to decommission it, it's really dodgy. The whole thing about decommissioning is a very dodgy exercise. But that's the least risk. So that's really what we have to do. And it's going to be extremely expensive to decommission. Also, if we look upon the world stage, we've signed a nuclear non-proliferation treaty with a lot of other nations. I'm going to rush you a little bit.
I take it you're against nuclear weapons, but...
But okay, we by committing to the new Trident, we're breaking that treaty. So we're not honouring our international commitments by doing that.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I just wanted to move on because the next question I know is a very, well, they're all challenging questions. Can I go to Mr. Donaldson, please, for his question?
Good morning, gentlemen. Immigration. It's been high on the agenda so far, this Great Britain. Do you see it as a problem or an opportunity, or somewhere in between?
Okay, now, of course, we don't have the UK Independence Party represented here today. What are your thoughts, Mr. Oxlade?
It's an opportunity. I mean, Crawley is based on immigration. The Irish are here in the 40s and 50s building the town, and a lot of the Irish stayed. And we've had, you know, there's very few what we'd call sort of inherently Crawley people, everyone's first, second or third generation. So immigration for the town, I think it's been a wonderful thing. You know, I grew up in Langley Green and in Pound Hill and Crawley, and it was great with so many different cultures, and growing up with that in the town makes me love the town for what it is. We're a very tight town, so issues, when they do appear, can have the potential of kicking off, basically. But because we're a very tolerant town, we're a very sort of liberal-minded town, and not Lib Dem town, but a liberal-minded town, that we tend to cope with those issues. The big problem, and this is where people's fears get basically escalated by certain political parties and political rhetoric, is the scaremongering. So, you know, we do have a problem with infrastructure. We do have a problem with public services through the cuts over the last 5 years in particular. But some people like to exploit that and basically, you know, blame immigration as there's one political party that isn't here, blames everything on immigration, that and Europe. So you know, and it's not as simple as that. You know, you can't. People have genuine fears about how the town's changing. But it's actually working with people, making sure, you know, we get the solutions quickly. So, you know, for instance, look at the GPs. It's impossible to get a surgery, you know, a GP appointment on the same day. And people, you know, may blame immigration for that, or, you know, the influx to the town. But it's, you know, that is an issue that's been going on a long, long time, and that's lack of investment in GP surgeries, and the knock-on effect with lack of care homes all the way through the NHS, which results in more people. The cuts in social care, adult social care, of 68 million over the last 5 years, means that people are now going straight to the GP. So there's a lot of complex needs in there, and I think it is wrong to use that as the scapegoat.
Okay, thank you much indeed. Henry Smith?
I agree with Chris. This is, as a new town, a town of migrants. Whether you come from 20 miles away or your family origins have come from around the world. It's the amazing thing about Crawley as a relatively new community is its extremely strong sense of identity, and I think it gets its strong sense of identity through its diversity, and I think that is very much a positive. Also, you know, people talk about immigration being a massive pressure on public services, but a lot of our public services are staffed by people who are migrants. Particularly the NHS is probably the biggest example of that. So I think the immigration issue, it's about the pace and the type of immigration, and that certainly has been causing concern over the last 10 or 15 years. This country's got a great and proud record of accepting people and being a very tolerant country, but people have been concerned that we have had, you know, 3 million people arrive in this country over the last 10 to 15 years, which is the fastest pace that has ever been in our history. So that has generated some fears, and fears that unfortunately, as I say, parties not represented here have perhaps played upon for political advantage. So I think, you know, we need to remain a country that is open to the world. You know, we're a small country geographically, but we have become a great nation because we have reached out to the rest of the world, and we're a trading nation, and we interact with the rest of the world. That has always been our history. And I think if we were to pull up the drawbridge, that would be to the detriment of this country. But we need to ensure that those people who want to come to this country are doing so to make either a contribution to our public services or to make a contribution to our economy. And we do need to address the issue of people who come here because of the benefits system, and that certainly does need addressing. So it's about the right type of immigration, and it's about the right pace of immigration, which I think is important. We need a balanced approach to this argument, but unfortunately what we have seen in recent years is the sort of siren voices that actually is simplifying what is a very complex issue, and I think that's a great shame.
Thank you very much, Sid. Finally, Guy.
I've been an economic migrant a number of times. When I first got my first proper job after university and after my apprenticeship, I was offered redundancy or going to work for a world leader in my specialist subject, which was vehicle structures. So I went to work for Volvo in Sweden. And they welcome migrants there greatly, and they offer free courses to learn Swedish, and I went to a Swedish course. And I was really amazed by the dictionary. In the beginning, there was the Swedish English, and it was only a fifth as thick as the English Swedish. And it's because there are 5 times as many words in English as there are in Swedish. And to this day, there are still more Norse words in English than there are in Swedish. And this is because of our rich culture. So there's Latin, there's Norman French, there's whatever the Angles spoke, there's ancient English, there's Celtic, there's Indian, there's many, many different roots in English. So one of the reasons why English is so difficult to learn properly, and why it has got such a massive vocabulary and it's got so many different forms of speech, is because of our culture. And this is why one of the reasons why our language is prized all over the world and is almost the leading language in the world. And by the same token, this is what gives, I agree with Chris, which is a fairly rare occasion, I'm afraid, but it's terribly important that we continue this tradition. It's a major strength in this country. But also the fear-mongering. What we've seen with the rise of other parties is that at the same time as we've had a lot of immigration, we've had successive governments that have treated the population extremely badly and have not performed this, all the privatisations and all that stuff. And so instead of being responsible governments to lead and to create good society, we've not had a good deal. So the answer is not to blame any new immigrants to the country, but to give people a better deal. And I was clearing out my daughter's room the other day, and I saw a book of hers that I'd never read, and it was called When Hitler Stole My Pink Rabbit. And I don't know if anybody's read the book, but it's fantastic. And it's about forced immigration because of the Nazi period in Germany, where a family had to go first of all to Switzerland, but then they very successfully settled in Paris. And it's a wonderful account of all of that. And I really do recommend it. And it really speaks so loudly about how we need to welcome and integrate the new migrants to our country.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Now, sadly, we are pushed for time, and we have other questions to ask, and we could go on about the potential coalition, potential SNP surge, EU referendum. But we are pushed for time, and we're immensely grateful that you have come here to answer these questions. Can I give you roughly 30 seconds each to make your final pitch to this audience as to why they should vote for you and your party in today's election? So, first of all, Chris Oxley.
Thank you. It is a vital election. Everyone says it's the biggest election for a generation. The fact of the matter is that you have a say. A lot of people think their vote doesn't count. In Crawley in 2005, there's just 37 votes between Labour and the Tories. It is a two-horse race today. But it's going to be neck and neck this afternoon, so your vote will make a difference. So if you're voting for cutting tuition fees, if you're making sure that you've got the best possible quality apprenticeships ahead of you, a guaranteed job after a year if you're unemployed, then the Labour Party is for you. But I just want to quickly say, use my 30 seconds, Jo, who's the Labour candidate, she's going to hate me for this, make sure you vote for her in the mock election today as well, because she's fantastic. And last time we had the mock election as well, I'm not going to embarrass the person who stood, but the Labour Party won in 2010. Not nationally, but here at St Wilfrid's they did. So please do give your vote for Jo today. Thank you.
Mr White was our candidate in 2005, Joanna Reeve in 2010. 2015, that's right. Thank you, Henry Smith.
We have come a long way in 5 years in terms of turning this country around, and as I mentioned at the very beginning, going from the biggest debt in the EU to now the strongest growth out of any major industrialised country. But the job isn't finished, and we need to complete that, and we need to complete that job so that we can afford good public services, so we don't settle your generation with an unsustainable future. That, I think, is very important. But mention was made of some questions that we haven't got to, so I'd briefly like to touch on that. One of those was an EU referendum. My party believes it's important that in the period of the next Parliament there is a referendum on our future membership of the European Union. because it increasingly affects our lives. And I was 6 years old when there was last a referendum on that issue, and it's changed hugely in that time. And secondly, the issue of the constitution of this country. The SNP are probably going to do very well in Scotland today, and yet in Parliament we have an imbalance where Scottish MPs can vote on English legislation, but English MPs can't vote on Scottish legislation, and we need to correct that imbalance in our constitution as well. So just touching on those sort of constitutional issues, those I think are very important for us to address in the coming few years.
Okay, thank you. And Guy.
I think the EU is a very, very important issue. I'm an extremely strong supporter of the EU, but like anything of human endeavour, it's far from perfect. We need to be in there. We need to be working in there. The rest of Europe look to us to contribute, to make our contribution there, and we're not doing that at the moment. There is an awful lot of opinion against the EU, a lot of misinformed info. The EU is very complicated. And so I strongly support another referendum so that we can have it out, we can really discuss it, and we can really get the issues out on the table. So that's that. Voting for a small party, what's really different about this election are the small parties. If you vote for the Greens, it will make a huge difference and will help towards democratic change. We also want to reform the Lords, which is gone, since the last Parliament, has gone way in the wrong direction. And also education, a lot of extra money for education, and most particularly the total abolition of university tuition fees, plus a grant while you are at university, to encourage many people to go to university as possible. Proper long-term apprenticeships where people actually learn, they're not just cheap labour. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Shane. And just a final, since the other two candidates have mentioned the referendum, in one word, Mr. Oxlade, EU referendum, yes or no?
Maybe.
All right. In a moment, you'll be dismissed, and to have your, please take your chairs. You should all have been given your voting registration form. You should all know, 1 second please, literally, just a few seconds. You have been brilliant. All around the school, you should all have got your voting cards. You all have the chance to go to a designated voting area at either break time. Please cast your vote, not particularly for the candidates you saw yesterday, your sixth form candidates, but also think, and for those sixth formers that can vote today, please, please express your voice and go and vote. Please give a round of applause to our parliamentary candidates. Thank you, it's me. Thank you.